Okay, guys, we're going to get ready to into ecology, and this is our first lecture for the ecology. And I just want you to take a picture or take a look at the picture on the left-hand side of the screen. And this is what we think ecologists generally do. They're out in the field or the forest, and we see binoculars and backpacks looking up, probably looking at some birds. And actually, I can tell you exactly what these guys are doing because this was back in 1991 when myself and Chin Sun and Beth Kaplan, the two people pictured there, and Ferdinand Ngayobihiga, our guide, we were out there studying tropical forest regeneration in the forest of southern Rwanda. And we were looking at birds and looking at what types of fruits they ate and how far they traveled. And we're also looking at monkey species to see what types of fruits they ate, because when they ate the fruits, they flew away or they ran away or they climbed away, and then they pooped out the seeds, and that spread the trees around and played a big role in the ecology of that particular forest. And this forest was under a lot of pressure from very high population density, and we were trying to figure out how can we protect the important ecological processes that were going on in the forest that would allow the forest to continue even under intense human pressure. So that's kind of what I did before I became a teacher, and we can get into more of that a little bit later. Anyways, I hope you have your notes out, and let's start talking about ecology. Ecology is basically how organisms interact with their environment. And organisms are the biotic component or the living component of any type of system, whether we're talking about a lake or a pond, even a drop of water can be a system for living organisms living inside of it. This, of course, is a picture of a giraffe at a water hole in the Serengeti, and that's a much larger ecosystem consisting of thousands and hundreds of thousands of animals, of thousands and thousands of different species. Now, those living organisms are also interacting with the abiotic component or the non-living component of any particular ecosystem. And of course, the abiotic factors or components of an ecosystem would be things like the water, the geology, the minerals, the soil, the non-living parts of the soil, the types, the temperature, the amount of sunlight, the amount of rainfall. All of those things are non-living and make up the abiotic components of that system. So when we start studying ecology, there are multiple levels on which we could study it. Organismal ecology is probably the one that you're most familiar with. That's when you see all the great videos on TV of, bears and whales and all that kind of stuff. And it's basically the study of what are the things that affect a group of organisms of the same species. How do they mate? When do they mate? How long do they live? What types of food organisms do they eat? What types of um, environment do they live in? All of those are aspects of organismal ecology. Now, population ecology to me is a little bit more exciting, and it's looking at everything that affects a population. So, first of all, what is a population? Population is a group of organisms of the same species living within an area that allows any of those individuals to interbreed. Now, we can have multiple populations of the same species as long as they are separated by some physical barrier, or it could even be an ecological barrier. Let's say a desert, and you have a forest that's surrounded by a desert. This is the Ngorongoro crater, which is in Tanzania, and you can see there's mountains surrounding this. This is actually on the inside of a volcano, a very large volcano, and it's a pretty relatively isolated ecosystem. So the population of zebras that live in Ngorongoro crater don't migrate like the zebras that live just outside of the crater in the Serengeti, which migrate on a yearly basis north and south. But these zebras are resident in that they live inside Ngorongoro crater. So it's a separated, isolated population. There's also isolated populations of rhinos and lions and baboons and vervet monkeys and silver monkeys and things like that that live inside of this very, very large ecosystem, the Ngorongoro crater ecosystem. Now, what's really cool about this system is just on the other side of those mountains is an area called the Oldupai Gorge, and that's where some of the earliest evidence of early humans at about 3.6 million years ago were discovered. And what they actually discovered were footprints that were embedded in volcanic ash. So this volcano erupted, laid down a layer of ash. It rained, and the ash was cool. And these two hominins, which are upright human-like organisms, although they look more like apes, walked across it bipedally on 2 feet, not like an ape, but like us. And those footprints have been preserved for over 3.5 million years. Cool stuff. Next level we go up to is communities. And communities are groups of populations interacting with each other. So here we see zebras and giraffes interacting with each other. Now there might be some lions in the background that are going to interact with the zebras, although not in a very pleasant manner. But also we can look at the zebras and the giraffes eating the acacia trees and the zebras eating the grass. That is a community interaction. It's a population of grass, there's a population of acacia trees, and these two different types of organisms are interacting because they are predating those plants. And then we get to our ecosystem level ecology. And when we talk about ecosystems, we're going to be talking about the flow of energy and the cycling of matter. And how does that go through an ecosystem? We all know that energy flows through the system. It's a one-way direction. It starts off in the form of light, gets transmitted into chemical energy, and then moves through the different trophic levels, the producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, the tertiary consumers, and finally our top level consumers. And at each one of those energy changes, we're going to see a loss of about 90% of that energy in the form of heat. And eventually all that heat gets lost back out to the universe, but it is never ever recycled. Energy just goes from high quality energy to low quality energy. And the Earth is an open system in terms of energy. We constantly have new energy coming into our planet on a daily basis in the form of light. Matter, on the other hand, is a different story. Matter has to be recycled, and that's what we have our decomposers for. They recycle all the nutrients and the matter and the carbon and the phosphorus and nitrogen and all that kind of stuff because we only have a limited supply of that on the planet. When we talk about landscape ecology, that's looking at a combination of different things, but it's looking at basically how do all of these different ecosystems interact with each other on a continental size scale. Okay, where ecology is looking at, you got it, the only place we call home at the present moment, our planet. And there are many scientists out there that, myself included, that believe our planet is a living organism as a whole, large, complex, interacting organism. And our planet breathes and respires in terms of looking at photosynthesis being the breathing part and cell respiration being the respiration part on a global scale. And we see the cycling of carbon and oxygen that way. So all of these things come together and they can determine the distribution of organisms. And the distribution of organisms we call biogeography. Bio meaning life, geo meaning earth, and graphy study of looking at this sort of the study of the distribution of where these animals are found. So what determines where kangaroos are found in Australia? If we look at the picture here, we can see that the dark brown is more than 20 kangaroos per kilometer. And then we go up to the red, which is 10 to 20, and the orange at 5 to 10, the pale color at 1 to 5, and the green and blue being very, very low densities of kangaroos. And if you know anything at all about Australia, you'll know that the area where we see kangaroos, especially down in New South Wales, it's a sparse. Um, it's well, I should say they're pretty dense grasslands with isolated trees. We don't see very dense forest there at all, and they're relatively dry. Now, where we see very few kangaroos, where the blue and the green are, I should say the dark blue and the green, that's really dry land. But in the areas where they are absent, up in the, like such as the Northern Territory and the large finger that's kind of sticking up on the top right-hand side of Australia, that's known as the Darwin Peninsula, and down by Victoria and Tasmania, why are there no kangaroos there? You know, those are actually pretty dense uh, rainforests. There's a lot of rain, dense forests, and things of that nature. So think about why they might not be in that particular region. What do kangaroos like to eat? They like to eat grass and stuff. Well, maybe there's not enough grass in those forest areas. The food is too unavailable. It's up in the trees in terms of leaves, and they can't get it. Or maybe it's just too wet for them. They don't like that. Or maybe there's diseases there that prevent the kangaroos from moving out there. Or maybe it's because the kangaroos like to the way they get away from predators is by hopping at a very fast speed, and they can't do that in a heavily densely forested area. So these are all things that can prevent the kangaroos from expanding out into new territories. Now, some animals have a tendency to expand very rapidly when they're brought into a new system. These are zebra mussels, and they've caused a massive headache in the Great Lakes regions up north. They are endemic, and the word endemic means found only in certain areas. They are endemic to, if I remember correctly, I think the Philippines. And when you're thinking, well, how the heck did they get to the Great Lakes? Well, there's a lot of cargo being shipped by big boats that go from the Philippines and they go around South America, or they go through the Panama Canal, and they come up the east coast of North America, and they go down this thing called the St. Lawrence Seaway, which brings them into the Great Lakes. Well, when they're carrying cargo, they also have a bunch of water they call ballast water that's sitting in the hold of the ship. And when they unload the cargo, they let the ballast water out, and in that ballast water, there are larvae of these zebra mussels. And once they got out into the Great Lakes, there were no predators for them, and they expanded their populations very, very, very rapidly. And it's caused all sorts of problems because they can clog up because they basically form dense mats of clams on all sorts of infrastructure and like dams and the turbines and dams and locks and stuff that the boats have to go through. So they cost millions and millions of dollars worth of damages. And I'm sure you guys know some other transplants, especially down here in the South. Can you think of one? Got it. Kudzu. Kudzu is another invasive species. There's nothing that really eats it here. It's another Southeast Asian exotic plant that was brought over to help stabilize soils in areas where they had cut the forest down. And of course, it has escaped, and now it goes crazy, as has one of our favorite animals down here in the South, the fire ant. Yep, the fire ants also came from Southeast Asia. And we used to have a fire ant that was native to Alabama. It was found down by Mobile Bay, but it wasn't a very bad insect at all. And fire ants first got their start in the Mobile Bay area. They probably got here on wooden pallets, again with cargo shipping. And once they got out, they had no predators. They're vicious animals. They're vicious predators themselves. They're very aggressive. They reproduce at a very, very high rate. And they basically took off with nothing to really sort of stop them. Now, if you look at that diagram, what do you think might be stopping them from going you know, from where they are in Nevada, Oregon, and Washington further eastwards, and where they are in the southern states from moving up. And if you guessed temperature, you guessed right. Okay, they are temperature uh, limited. They can't extend the colder winters further north. Of course, why you think, well, look how far they are up in Oregon and Washington. Those are pretty temperate, mild states. They have the Pacific Ocean, the warm currents of the Pacific Ocean keep that whole west coast pretty darn tootin' warm, in general. And of course, that's what happens when you tangle with fire ants. Another one that's dear to me, of course, our African killer bees. These were brought into South America as a research project back in the 1950s. They got out and they started to interbreed. Excuse me, guys. They started to interbreed with regular honeybee species, and they're pretty aggressive. They're not really killer bees. They just will sting you a little bit more than other bees will, and of course, you might get stung a lot more than other bees. And but they're really not all that bad. We do not yet have them in Alabama. We have them in Mississippi. We have them in Georgia. We have them in Florida. And there's some reasons why we don't have them in Alabama, but I can get into that in class.